Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1985 horror film, The Return of the Living Dead. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Vontae for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, The Return of the Living Dead is, for a lot of people, their favorite 80s horror film, their favorite zombie movie. And I gotta be honest, I didn't grow up with this film like other people did. I didn't really watch the film for the first time until years ago on VHS. And I remember liking it, but I didn't necessarily consider it to be a significant favorite of mine. Um, Over the years, I've definitely developed a little bit more affection for the film, and I'm a bigger fan of it now than I was the first time that I saw it. I think it's one of those things where I was aware of the hype in various different publications, various different books, and other places. So when I saw the movie for the first time, I was kind of like, okay, that was fun, but didn't necessarily feel that was like one of the greatest films of the genre. And yeah, it's just one of those movies that the more that I see it, the more there are things about it that stand out and more things that I like about it. But I also have to admit, I do prefer the original Dawn of the Dead more, or even Day of the Dead, or even something like Night of the Creeps or the Blob remake. But it's still a really good and genuinely classic horror film. And I totally get it. I get why it has a pretty sizable cult following. It's directed by Dan O'Bannon, who also wrote the film. And Dan O'Bannon, he had been a collaborator and had worked on a ton of different projects before this. I believe he also worked with John Carpenter and Dark Star, and he was, of course, involved with Alien and Dead and Buried. And this was his first film that he directed. And for a first time director, I thought that his work here was pretty uh, impressive. I was honestly really impressed by his sense of visual style, his ability to work with the camera in terms of shooting more complicated practical effects and not making them look all rubbery and fake. Um, Creating sequences that had some real tension and real thrills behind them, utilizing different forms of lighting and different shading and different styles of filmmaking to really create a unique looking film. Uh, he said in interviews that he wishes that he didn't have as many shots that were outside the box, like some of the shots that are top down, looking down at one of the characters walking to another building late at night, as he felt it made it less personal. And I think he had the right idea shooting these scenes in a different way that's not typical, because it makes it stand out. Like that shot in particular really is one of the shots in the film that made me go, all right, okay, you've got some serious talent as a director, because that was a really great looking shot. And there's a few other shots like that throughout the film. So I think directing wise, this film is really really solid, really strong, has some really great work behind the camera by Dan O'Bannon. And sadly, like, he didn't really do a whole lot after this. He did The Resurrected, which I also don't mind, and I thought he did a pretty good job directing that too, but I for some reason it just didn't lead to a lot of significant opportunities for him to direct more. He just continued to write, continued to be the guy who's on the set, or he's working on a certain project creatively, but he didn't really go and be the man behind the camera, uh, except for The Resurrected, and that was it. The script by Dan O'Bannon. It's loosely based on a novel that John Russo wrote, which was called Return of the Living Dead. The novel by John Russo was intended to be a sequel to Night of the Living Dead, because John Russo also wrote the novel Night of the Living Dead. And I have that book actually. I have the tie in version, which is a tie in to this film. I think it was released in the UK. And it's not at all the plot of this movie. It's a very different kind of plot. It's an interesting read, but it's not what you would necessarily expect when it comes to a tie-in. But this was then retooled into its own film that's inspired by Night of the Living Dead, even has some references to Night of the Living Dead, but it's not a straight up sequel to Night of the Living Dead, because that's Romero's thing. That's what Romero was doing with his Dead films, and Dan O'Bannon and other people involved with this, they respected Romero and they decided to just make it into one of those things where this isn't going to be a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. This is going to be its own different kind of zombie film. And Dan O'Bannon's script for this, to me, it's a tale of two halves. I think the first half of this script is stellar. I think it's spectacular. I think it does a really fine job establishing its cast of characters, the setting, and drawing you in. The opening of the film is very different in terms of building characters and showcasing the setting before the opening credits. The way that it establishes the working relationship of Frank and Freddie, and gives you a little taste of what's to come with Frank's story about how Night of the Living Dead was actually inspired by a true story, and the bodies are in the basement. And when Frank and Freddy then go down into the basement, and Frank screws up, and the canisters start leaking, and they get exposed to the trioxin, then you get to the opening credits. And I thought that was a really unique way to open the film, and it's a great way to draw you in. You get introduced to the characters of Freddy and Frank. You get an idea of what's going on at Oneida Medical Supply, what it's like to work there, almost like a day in the life kind of thing. And then things start to hit the fan, and then we get the opening credits, and then we also get a little bit after that in terms of character bits involving the punkers, involving the punk rock crew, the group of punks, and how they connect to the story, and they connect to Freddy because of Tina, and how she's Freddy's girlfriend, and so on and so forth. There's also this mysterious, vague military involvement that definitely makes you think in terms of, okay, what's going on with this? Why are we cutting to this guy? What does he have to do with anything? Or what's going on here? It's got a little bit of a sinister vibe, kind of creepy in its own way because of, the government and how creepy and clandestine they can be. And the first half also introduces a different character in Ernie, who works at the morgue, who at the mortuary, and it's just doing such a remarkable job setting up the building blocks for the carnage that is going to eventually ensue. And I think the tone is really consistent as well in terms of the balance of serious horror or seriousness and comedy. And the comedy in particular to me is at its best in this first half of the script. I think the sardonic wit, the lines of dialogue, the reaction scenes from these characters reacting to the body parts coming to life. That's where the the script really cooks for me. Now the second half is when things just start to devolve into just chaos. And I think there is something to be said about that in terms of it can be a positive at times in terms of just how crazy things can get, with the send more cops and send more paramedics and the body count rising and this just sense of hopelessness that starts to settle in when they realize that these reanimated corpses that can't be killed, if you try to burn them, you just make things worse because then you just create more zombies because you sent the fumes from their burned up corpses into the air, and now it's causing the sky to rain trioxin, and it's just making things so much worse because now all the dead bodies in the graveyard are popping out, and now they want to eat your brains. Um, I think Tarman in particular is a terrific character, terrific curation, very creepy. But also there's a certain tongue in cheek kind of silliness to the character, which makes it kind of funny. And I definitely feel that was definitely intentional. And despite all of this, you have moments that are a little bit too over the top for my taste, a little bit too zany. Like there's a whole scene where the characters are trying to board themselves up in the mortuary, and we got beach music playing in the background. It to me that just kind of took me out of the film a little bit. And there's a few other moments like that in the second half. Also, when it starts to focus a little bit more on the group of punks, Linnea Quigley is an absolutely drop dead gorgeous woman. And yeah, I mean, I definitely want to make love until I die when it comes to her in this film as trash. But the other punkers, the other characters, other than maybe Spider, there's really not much to them. They're just kind of boring cannon fodder. The only thing that really makes them stand out is their fashion and the fact that they're punk rockers, like Scuzz or Suicide. I believe that's the guy's name. Now, there's also the stuff with Tina and this other guy and there's this other girl too who really didn't do that much for me. Um, so that there's a lot of characters. There's a lot of these teenagers that are set up and put on the chopping block, but I don't know. Some of their personalities just weren't really that memorable. Some of the dialogue really wasn't anything that really stood out to me. Uh, and even when it comes to the main characters like Bert and Frank and Ernie and Freddie, like even some of the banter that they had, especially in the second half of the script, it just wasn't as memorable and wasn't as funny to me. So it's one of those films where there's definitely comedy here, but it seems like it just kind of doesn't have a lot of that in the second half, other than like maybe a few exceptions here and there. But for the most part, a lot of it just becomes more serious. And I think that's definitely something that works. But it does create a script that feels a little uneven in terms of the tone. But I do love scenes like the sequence with the half corpse, where it's talking and it's explaining why it wants brains. That was very affecting. It was emotionally intense and really made you think, like, okay, it just completely turned the idea of zombies and everything on its head, because now it wasn't something where these reanimated corpses are just shambling around and just, eating brains. Now it shows that they are cognizant, that they're aware of what they're doing. And now there's a reason behind it, other than, oh, that's just kind of scary and disturbing that they want brains. Instead, it's to stop the pain of being dead. Like, that's horrifying. And just on also the way that it depicts Freddie and Frank dying after they're exposed to the trioxin, going through rigor mortis while they're still alive, or not, they're dead, but I mean their brains are still alive, they're still aware of it. So going through something as painful as rigor mortis and all of this other stuff while you're still self-aware of what's happening, that's terrifying. That's absolutely horrifying. Also the idea that once you go through the final phase of this transformation, you are no longer you. You are only focusing on one thing, and that's brains. And it doesn't matter if it's the brains of your girlfriend or your loved one or a family member. Like, that doesn't matter. Like, you become this ruthless uh brain munching monster. And the scenes where Freddy is like trying to manipulate Tina, and is trying to tell her that it's okay, it's all right, I'm okay now, I just want your brains. Like, that's some effective horror. But there's other moments where it just evolves into kind of screwball comedy with some of the zombie scenes, and that isn't as effective for me. And the ending, I give it props for being dark and being ballsy. This is a very ballsy ending to end the film the way that it does, with the nuclear strike and everything. But the way that it's executed, I just felt was a bit off. And I think it might have to do with the lack of a budget. Like, they didn't have a massive budget to work with for this film. So maybe they ran out of money. Um, but the way that things are set up in terms of this ending, I think they showed a little bit too much. I think you should have just had like the bomb drops, you see the explosion, and credits. You already know that things are completely screwed and everyone is fucked because the rain is already falling down. And there's no way that it's just this one place and this one graveyard that the rain has come down at. The rain has probably been happening all throughout the state and all throughout the general area. It's in the atmosphere now, so it's just going to spread. So the fact that, oh, there's this nuclear explosion and everything, and now you show the zombies coming to life again, like, I don't think that was needed. You didn't need the radio the people on the radio talking about how, the threat is neutralized and everything's okay. I don't think that was necessary. I think all you need is just a bomb is dropped. There we go. Because I think it just feels a little tacked on when it comes to some of the stuff that happens afterwards. And I also have to be honest about this script. There are characters in this film that I like Spider and Freddy and Frank and some aspects of Bert. But there's a lot of other characters that I don't really care about that much, like Scuzz or some of the other uh, um, members of the punks. And for every fun, somewhat memorable line of dialogue or exchange between a character, there's a lot of other moments where there's that it's not anywhere near as memorable. And yeah, comparison to something like Fred Decker's Night of the Creeps or Romero's Dead sequels or some of these other movies, like there isn't really a lot of extra stuff to kind of think about either when it comes to the script, in terms of uh, subtext, and that's okay because like Night of the Creeps, to be honest, there's not a lot of subtext in that. But with Romero's films, definitely. But here, there's not a lot of that, and I think that's fine. But it just would have been a nice layer to add. And it seems like they're trying to do it with the military stuff, but it didn't really come across that clear to me. And yeah, it's just one of those things where at a certain point, there isn't as much tension because I'm not as like I'm just not as into the plot or the characters because once things are just revealed and stuff's happening and the zombies are attacking, it's just one of those things where there's not a lot that I'm firmly rooting for. So a lot of the enjoyment or the interest in the second half of the story is, oh, the idea of being dead and it being painful and you wanting brains in order to make the pain stop. The little bits of dark comedy here and there, or like gore. That's or the stuff with Linnea Quigley's trash character as a zombie. Like other than that, like I'm not as interested in the other stuff in terms of the survival aspect of it. And I think the fact that everyone just dies anyway, it definitely does affect the effectiveness of that angle as well. It's like, okay, the survival aspect I don't think was as strong as it could be because these characters weren't as strong as they could have been. And so then when you just find out that, oh, they're dead, they're all dead anyway, it's like, okay, like even if it was more effective, it still has this ending where nobody makes it out alive. So I definitely do feel that that kind of hurts the story a little bit. And despite that, there are some effective moments that really do carry a lot of weight, like the stuff with Frank's character and how he decides to essentially, I wouldn't say sacrifice himself. He decides to commit suicide in the furnace. And that was a genuinely tragic scene that carried weight to it because I actually sympathized with and I kind of felt for that character. And then, but then once he was dead, then it was just Gulager's character and Spider and the other survivors who didn't do anything for me. And it just wasn't as full of tension or suspense at that point. Or really as much intrigue. And I don't even think with Frank and that whole scene, that's something that Dan is responsible for anyway. From what I read, that was something that James Karen came up with, and he decided that that's how his character should go out. Because initially, the character was going to be a part of the roaming band of zombies, but then he just didn't like that. He didn't want to do it, so then he came up with the idea that his character would take himself out. And it was his idea to take the wedding ring off and do all that other stuff. That's all James Karen. That's not Dan O'Bannon. So, but yeah, it's just I get it. I understand why people really like the ending and they like how everything is set up, but I just felt like I don't know. I mean, even the Tar Man, like he was set up as this kind of this big bad, and then he gets defeated way too easily. Like it's a punchline with the character. And there's other stuff too where it's like I was left wanting more. Like I was hungry for a little bit more, like a little bit more visceralness, a little bit more of a bite. And by the time things ultimately ended with the movie, it was just one of those things where it was like, okay, all right, I understand where they're going with it, but it just wasn't as satisfying to me as it is for other people by the end of it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and say that the film is bad or overrated. Like that's not the point of this video. Like I still really like the film. I enjoyed the film. I found it to be fun. It was entertaining and made me think. But I just feel the script could have been a little bit tighter and could have been a little bit better in some areas. The cast, I think for the most part, it's good. Clue Gulager, he's fine as Bert, but I didn't find the character or the performance to be really good or great or spectacular. Like I felt it was fine. It was decent enough. It was good. Would have really been curious to see what Leslie Nielsen would have brought to that role because apparently he was considered for it, but couldn't do it because of salary or because of his schedule at the time. But I really would have loved to have seen Leslie Nielsen play that character. And I'm not saying Clue did a bad job, but Leslie Nielsen just has a better deadpan and he's just a better comedic actor. And I just think the back and forth between him and James Karen would have been potentially really brilliant and really funny. James Karen, I thought he was great. Like he was the one that stood out more to me than Clue Gulager. Like I thought he was really good in the film. His reactions to stuff when it's coming to life in the beginning is just a riot. So is all the stuff that's happening to him later on in the movie. And some good dramatic acting when he decides to put himself into the furnace. Don Calfa, I had some enjoyment and some some kudos to give as Ernie. I would have liked to have seen this performance and this character as the way it was initially intended, which was he was supposed to be like a Nazi in hiding, and that's why he says German lines. That's why he has a German pistol. That's why there are all these little Easter eggs, little things that hint to him being German. And I know it would have been controversial, but I think it would have added an extra layer to the story that I feel would have been really interesting. Um, but as it is, I still think it's a good performance, and Don did a good job playing the role. Thom Matthews, I think his best work is in Jason Lives, but he's still good in this as Freddy. Although the character doesn't really have a whole lot to do with after a certain point, except just slowly get poisoned and then turn into a zombie. But I give Thom Matthews credit because he has a lot of inherent charisma and charm to him, and that definitely is on display in this film, especially early on. And his incredulousness in some scenes with his line delivery really cracked me up. Like when he finds out that the movie was real, it was like it wasn't just a movie. like the zombies are real. Like that was really funny. And it was actually kind of scary and creepy when he was a zombie trying to go after Tina. Beverly Randolph as Tina. She was fine. I don't think she's gonna rank very high on my list of female characters in horror, but she was good for what she was asked to do. I mean, it's honestly not much of a role. And I will say this: I feel that she was kind of let down by the script, and I didn't mention this when I was talking about the script, but I might as well kind of mention it here. I didn't really feel that much of a strong connection when it comes to the relationship between Tina and Freddie, because you never see them on screen elope or really be romantic with one another. You just see the stuff later on when he's already too far gone. And I think if you saw some scenes with the two earlier on, if you saw maybe a flashback or something, then when he turns into a zombie, then it would be really tragic. But as it is, it's supposed to be really sad and tragic just because you know that they're boyfriend and girlfriend, but you don't have that strong connection when it comes to their relationship. So it just kind of, it doesn't necessarily fall completely flat, but it's not as strong. It doesn't have as much of an impact as it could, and I think it kind of limited what Tina, uh, as a character, was able to do, and in turn what Beverly was able to bring to it. Miguel Núñez Jr. Spider, it was enjoyable. I liked his performance. Felt he had some good chemistry with the rest of the cast. Um, I would say out of all of the punk characters, he was the best one, because I'm definitely not going to say it was Brian Peck, the scuzz, the real life scuzz. Um, John Philbin as Chuck, Jules Shepard as Casey. They were just kind of there for me. Linnea Quigley was, she definitely stood out in this as trash. Um, Not what I would consider to be like the most in depth sort of role for her, but it's still one of her most memorable because of everything entailing the character and what she brought to it. Um, Mark Venturini is Suicide. Good look to him. Had a good. I thought he had a decent presence. Honestly, I wish he was in it more than Scuzz and some of these other characters, but that's just me. Then you have Jonathan Terry, who plays Colonel Glover, and he was fine as well. Alan Trotman, I want to mention, who played the Tarman zombie. So yeah, for the most part, it's a pretty decent enough cast. The cinematography for this kind of film works for what they're trying to do, especially when it comes to like the rainy, grimy graveyard at night, and just the medical supply warehouse and everything, the mortuary. Like it's an effective film when it comes to the cinematography, the bringing the creeps and bringing the just spooky atmosphere and the eeriness. The editing is also in the same boat in terms of really exemplifying and amplifying the film's mood. The music by Matt Clifford, I thought was pretty good. There's some good notes, especially the opening theme or the main theme for the film. The soundtrack though is the bigger standout for me. The songs that were used for the film. Um, Party Time by 45 Grave. Um, Tonight we'll make love until we die by SSQ. Um, Burn the Flames by Rory Erickson. Uh, I know Deadbeat Dance by The Damned was used in the original version, but it's not in like the version on 4K for some reason. That song's okay. Surfin' Dead by the Cramps. I like the Cramps, but I don't care for that song, and I don't like its inclusion in the film. It just completely changes the tone of a scene, where up until that point it was actually building some genuine tension with the zombies, and there's more of them, and they're eating all the paramedics, and they're doing all that, and now they're trying to board up the mortuary and keep them out, and then beach music. It was just a poor fit for me. But the other songs I really liked. And I also want to give a lot of credit to William Stout. I think his name is William Stout, who did the production design, and a very young Tony Gardner, who worked on the practical makeup effects for the film. Uh, this was one of his earlier films, and he did some absolutely astonishing work for the movie. And yeah, it's like 91 minutes, so it's not. It is a pretty quick well placed film. Even though I do feel the first half, the first 40 minutes are stronger than the next half of the film. But yeah, it's a fun one. It's a fun movie. It's a fun one. Even though there are some pretty messed up things in it and some genuinely horrifying elements that really make you think about um, the genuine terror of being dead, which is something that a lot of these films don't really address, and also the horror of zombies that cannot be killed. Like you cannot kill them. They will kill you and keep on killing. The only way that you can ever survive these zombies is if you just get as far away from the location as possible. And even then, like if these zombies are around, and more than likely it's because it's hell on earth and we are all screwed and everyone is gonna have their brains eaten, because if these kind of these zombies, the trioxin zombies, are on the loose, everyone is fucked. And that there is something really genuinely horrifying and unsettling about that. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about the film except thanks for watching my review of The Return of the Living Dead. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.